number 1, Spanish-American War, 10th grade English or American history, and these are my students. And today we're going to start off talking about the Spanish-American War and some of the major news contributions that led to the Spanish-American War and how it played out in the actual newspapers, what was being covered and what reasons were being covered. And so first off, I figured we'd start off with the idea of yellow journalism. Who in here knows what yellow journalism is? Yes, you want to answer?
Isn't that journalism that is almost purposefully non-factual?
Yes, I guess you would call it exaggerated to the point of untruth. What would be some hallmarks of that kind of journalism? Maybe like stories that were a little exaggerated, like as far as like truths that were half truths, maybe sources weren't cited, that kind of stuff.
Like the Maine?
Yes, like in the sinking of the Maine, which is a classic example of yellow journalism because there was so much where people wanted this news, but there just wasn't any actual news to cover. We didn't really know what happened, and so information just began to be just kind of whatever. They would put out whatever information they wanted to put out. And so beforehand, I had you guys review some documents. And can you tell me some things that you gained from those documents?
There was a lot of different views on all the things that happened during what might have occurred.
Yeah. And what were some of those differing views?
One had a supposed eyewitness account about a floating thing that may have caused us damage to the ship, and there was another one that was speculating about underwater mines that may have also done something. And they didn't really make mention of each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. And those two are actually from the same newspaper, only a few days after each other. Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that that would be one of the ways that they would go about that. And so on on Cuba Land of Promise, there were a couple of other things that were included in there. Can you talk about some of what you observed in that document?
I can't really get much out of it, but I couldn't really read it by missing glasses.
Can I help you with some of those sources from that document, I guess? But so one of the things that we've just covered as far as the sinking of the Maine, here we have some actual images that were included in some of the newspapers. And so you see we have this image of mines, but there's no actual proof that those mines existed. It's just that somebody heard it from somebody. And back to what you said about the eyewitness reports. Did you notice anything about the eyewitness reports that seemed a little odd?
It was they didn't mention any names, and they didn't really mention any ranks or anything.
Exactly. It was just some random soldier that they didn't even have any, and they said, I believe they justify it by saying for obvious reasons we've withheld his name. But that just seems a little bit, like kind of a given to. But the point is that once we go through these articles, the articles also give us kind of an examples of what American opinions were at the time about the actual sinking of the Maine and how it was, what we needed to go to war for. And so there was kind of three broad reasons that we could list for why the Americans felt it was necessary to go to war with Cuba. And those included economic, social, humanitarian, and think we, as far as in your article, did you notice any things that fall into these three categories, either economic, social, humanitarian, or governmental responses to why we need to go to war with Cuba?
Yeah, it was, they definitely seemed like they wanted to go to war because of the inhumane saying of the heinous crime and all that.
And then there's also another thing that to kind of cover in this question is in this document, and I guess if you haven't observed these, then there are several reasons that are enlisted as far as for economic reasons that we might want to go to war because there were varying interests from sugar planters in Cuba who already owned businesses. And for example, C&H Sugar was actually a product that, Cuban and Hawaiian. These companies had interests even at the time in maintaining what they had there. And so these became kind of a big deal for the Spanish or for the American interest in getting involved in the war. These happened, these interests were spreading stories even before the sinking of the Maine. And so they've talked about how the Spanish people were being so roughly oppressed by the Cuban people were being so roughly oppressed by the Spanish people. And in that document in particular, there is a line that talks about how that the Spanish treat the natives so poorly over there. Anyways, we can come in and it won't be a big problem. They're practically former slaves. And then this kind of goes into the idea that people were already kind of looking down on them, and then it mentions that we could immigrate up to 1 million people onto the island to farm it because it's just so prosperous. And so from that kind of gathering, where might those two ideas fit in? Plantation space essentially, and there's economic, social. We have the treatment from the Spanish. So what I want to ask is, based off of those reasonings, what do you think was the strongest kind of reasoning that we could use for why they were going? Do you think it was more of a concern for the Spanish people themselves, or do you think it was more of a concern for the possibility of being able to start new plantations, open up more markets, and also there's important to remember that tariffs would go away if they become a American colony, because if they're part of the American, at least in territory form, then they won't have to charge any import taxes. And so this is a huge benefit for people seeking economic gain. Anyways, that concludes the part of my lesson right now.